Hi guys, today we're going to talk about Wayne's first two movie theaters. So let's just jump right in. So back in the day, Wayne's first movie theater was actually in this building right here. It was originally a furniture store back in the day, but from 1913 to 1927, it was actually the first silent movie house, called the Alcyon. It was obviously a pretty small space, couldn't probably hold more than 50 people, and again, this was the time before talking movies, so people would go and watch silents. The Alcyon Group was actually a small chain run by some people from Detroit, and there was at least one other one known in Dearborn. Here's that building today. Up until a couple years ago, it was the home to Mean Ink Tattoos. And now we get to the Wayne Theater. The idea began to swirl about 1925 for a newer, larger theater in Wayne. So a group of men got together and formed the Wayne Theater Corporation and incorporated for $100,000. The plan was for a large new theater, a 21-room hotel, 5 storefronts, and a bowling and billiard room in the basement. Work began in August 1926 on the site on Michigan Avenue. The whole project was designed and managed by Charles K. Miller, who was a local Wayne guy. And the theater finally opened Saturday, August 27, 1927 at 6:30 p.m. And here we see the Wayne Theater building now open, as the marquee says. It did indeed have 5 storefronts on the first floor, and the second floor was a hotel. Not every room had a bathroom, but it was getting better. This was the 1920s after all. On the right side, that's the theater lobby, and above it was the offices and a reception room. Here's a shot inside the original lobby from 1929. And here's a view from the stage looking out at the theater. Now, this theater was actually designed for moving pictures and for live performances. It was designed to house vaudeville shows, and there were even plans to install an organ a little bit later on. There was also an orchestra pit, there's fly space for scenery, and there were dressing rooms down below the stage. The building was built using reinforced concrete, so it was fireproof. And it was the first building in Wayne with a steel truss roof. They used a lot of local companies for the wood, the foundation work, electrical. There were over 5,000 light bulbs in the building, and the marquee had 594 alone. The theater itself sat 850 people, had a 35-foot wide stage. There was a ladies' lounge on the second floor, a balcony, as you can see, and men's smoking room in the basement. And it was managed by the Woodward Theater Company. And this theater was very popular. It very often had standing room only. It apparently got very, very hot inside. It had no air conditioning at the time, and there are stories of the Wayne Fire Department going outside and hosing down the walls to try to cool off the interior. Now, not long after opening, management of the theater switched to a theater group called the Coppin Theater Group. They managed several other theaters in Detroit, and the manager at the time is a man named Walter Schaefer. In 1928, Schaefer introduced the first talking movie at the Wayne Theater. And things were going well, up until 1929 when the stock market crashed. By May 1930, Coppin had closed 8 theaters, including the Wayne. Now in 1930, the Wayne Theater was closed, but it was bought by its manager at the time, Walter Schaefer. Schaefer was a very prominent theater manager in Detroit. He actually managed 27 theaters, including the Fox. And things were going good. He had a really nice house in Grosse Pointe, a wife and 3 kids. And he bought the Wayne Theater here for $5,000. He reopened it and started a 10-cent movie night. His 2 boys were the janitors, and his wife Lillian ran the concession stand. But in 1932, his bank failed, and he lost everything, including his house in Grosse Pointe. He moved to Wayne and moved into a really rundown log cabin that they called the Death House. They were broke, but continued to run the theater. By 1934, they were attracting over 2,000 people per night and making enough to get by and slowly make improvements to the property. Here's a picture of the building from 1936, and that was the year that Schaefer changed out the original marquee to this more modern, streamlined one, and of course with his name on it. That year, he also installed 4 new Brunswick bowling alleys and pool tables in the basement at a cost of $4,800. Things were going so good that in 1939, he opened a second theater in Garden City. And this would eventually spiral into them owning and operating at least 10 theaters and becoming some of the most prominent residents of Wayne. In April 1940, they announced plans to build the 1,100-seat theater in Wayne. Construction was to begin that May, but because of World War II, plans were indefinitely put on hold. And this is what that original theater was going to look like, called the Academy. Here's a picture of the theater from 1940. That year, they added this really distinctive 18-foot tall neon sign that said Wayne. They also added air conditioning and redecorated some of the interior. Now, after World War II, they were finally able to build their new second theater in Wayne, called the State. And of course, that is still around today. And in 1949, they also built a third theater in Wayne, the Wayne Drive-In. Now, the State and the Old Wayne did operate together for a while. But in 1951, the lobby of the Old Wayne ceased to be a lobby and became a music store. But the theater itself behind the building still operated until at least 1954, when it was closed as a theater, leaving the State as the only movie venue in Wayne. Eventually, the old theater, the seats were removed, the floor was leveled, and a small dance and music room was built over it, and it became part of Wayne Music. Everyone kind of forgot about the old Wayne Theater. To help people forget even more, in the 1960s, the Schaefers put this modern facade on the building, completely obscuring its original 1927 details. Now, in 1985, there was a tragic fire, most likely arson, but it destroyed the original hotel, the 5 storefronts, and the lobby. As you can see here, it was one of the worst fires Wayne had ever seen. When that 1960s facade was pulled down, this is what was left. As you can see, the entire left side of the building, the original hotel and stores, were completely leveled. The part of the building on the right, that was the original lobby and some of the offices, did partially survive, but ultimately it was decided it was too unstable. This is what the plot looked like after all the debris was cleared away and the original lobby was removed. That huge brick monolith is the actual theater with the balcony and the stage. It completely survived the fire, just with some minor smoke damage. And this actually helped people kind of remember the Wayne and realize maybe we should save this. Here's a shot of the original lobby again. And here was what was left after the fire. So you can see the staircase made it, and some of the flooring made it. It was just empty brick walls. After the fire, the first group that stepped up was the Wayne Civic Players. They were a 30-year-old community theater group looking for a home. They had unsuccessfully tried to save a couple theaters in the area, but this one, being right in the heart of downtown, would have been perfect. So they began applying for grants, having fundraisers, and making necessary repairs to the building. The group ended up purchasing the theater from the Schaefers, and they eventually put on a new roof, were working on the electrical, bathrooms, things like that. This is actually a rare view from the late 80s of what the Players would have walked into. As I said before, the floor had been leveled, and there were all kinds of practice rooms and storage rooms built on the floor with a false drop ceiling. So if you were ever in Wayne Music in those practice rooms, you were actually in this ornate theater and never even knew it. But as you can see, the stage is still there, the proscenium is still there, and the group began tearing down these walls and reopening the theater. Here's another shot of the interior from the late 80s, and this is showing those false rooms that were built on the floor, but the original 1927 details are still all intact up above. Here's a shot of the group removing all those walls and trying to clear out the building. If you were around Wayne in the late 80s and early 90s, you probably remember the haunted houses they used to have in there. The theater group, being really good at acting, obviously, they would decorate up the entire place as a haunted house and have some high school kids come and help. This raised a significant amount of money to fund the restoration. Here's another shot of the busy haunted houses at the time. It was estimated at the time that about $450,000 was needed to restore the theater to get it functional, and that a total restoration, including rebuilding the lobby, would cost about $2 million. The group was being really successful in their fundraising into the early 90s. They sold seat naming rights, many of the businesses donated in town, many people personally donated, and it hinged on a critical grant in 1991 for $100,000. But that year, the state canceled all the grants and left this theater out to dry. The group couldn't really handle the loss of the grant and their aging membership and the amount of work that it was taking to work on this place. So the Wayne Civic players kind of fell apart. Here is a seat that we have in our museum collection that is from the restoration campaign. If you donated a certain amount of money, you would get your name on a seat, and in theory, if they sold every seat in the theater, they could raise enough money to do some work. This was a good idea, but as the theater group kind of fell apart and new characters came in, there were a lot of misappropriations. There's a lot of allegations of misappropriation of funds, people making deals when they shouldn't have, presidents spending money when they haven't asked the boards. Also, a lot of people and businesses had already donated over the past couple of years, and they weren't really seeing progress. And as the middle and later 90s went on into the early 2000s, there was just a little bit less and less faith in this group, who became, over time, a little bit more and more ragtag. Here's a view from the balcony looking down at the stage. So the original floor was reinstated as a slope. You can see the stage was reopened. Those are actually the original curtains from 1927 and the original movie screen. You can see down below the stage is the Orchestra Pit. And you can just see the really ornate detail that was left in there. All the cornice and the rosettes up there. Here's a closer up view of that original movie screen from 1927. This is a view of the cherubs over the stage, over the proscenium arch. And just some more of the ornate plaster details that was left in the building. And a shot of one of the original chandeliers with the original paintwork stenciling on the ceiling. And just another view of some of the moldings, the egg and dart and the rosettes, and the original stenciling still on the walls. All in all, there was still a lot left. Most of the walls were just slightly darkened because of the smoke from the fire in the 80s, but most of the plasterwork was actually in pretty decent shape. And here's a view looking from the stage back out at the audience. As you can see up near the top left, they did start to rehab some of the walls and repaint them. Those red seats are from the closed Quo Vadis Theater in Westland, and they were starting to kind of get things together. But by this time, in the mid-2000s, the group was largely ran by the kids who used to be in the haunted houses. So they were well-intentioned, but really didn't have much knowledge behind restoration and how to run these kinds of groups. And ultimately, the city came down about 2008 and said, if you don't make X, Z, and Y improvements by a year or two from now, we're going to take over the theater. So, as you can see from this picture, the group did not meet the deadline. In 2008, the group was told to vacate. So the building was stripped of its furnishings, what was left of it, all of the chandeliers, seats, anything they could salvage, and the city tore the building down in 2008. And here's another shot, looking back up at the balcony. of the halfway demolished theater. Although it's sad that the theater is gone, a lot of artifacts from it were salvaged. Seen here is one of the original seat ends from the Wayne Theater, even with a W on it. We even have one of the original theater bills from the lobby hanging on our wall. And those bowling pins there are actually from the bowling alley in the basement. Here's a view of that lobby again, and you can see the playbills right there on the wall. We even got some of the original plasterwork, some of the details, and one of the ceiling medallions that would have been around a light fixture. We also have one of the original chandeliers from the main auditorium ceiling. It needs rewired and a little bit of restoration, but we're hoping one day to have some money to be able to fix it and put it on display. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me on this journey through Wayne's first 2 movie theaters. And if you have any questions, just comment down below, and we'll be back with more videos soon. Thanks.